people argue that in order to be happy, you have to feel pain.
In order for me to be happy, you have to feel pain. Yeah. I think the relation between pain and pleasure is complex. The relation between pleasure and happiness is complex. There's many kinds of pain, many kinds of pleasure, many kinds of happiness. There's some kinds of pleasure that do seem to be tied to pain kind of inextricably. I mean, tickling is a classic example. Kind of fun to be tickled, kind of annoying. It's like alternation of little annoyance and little relief. It all comes together to cause some pleasure. And in a more abstract sense, I mean, romantic love is often observed to involve like alternating joy and suffering, going back and forth.
Joy and suffering going back and forth. Is that joyful or is it painful?
He's scratching some fleas or mosquito bites or something.
Okay. So yeah.
Yeah, tickling is a classic example which Friedrich Nietzsche used to illustrate the fact that pleasure and pain are not opposites. As he pointed out, tickling is a bit pleasurable, a bit painful. The pleasure and pain are kind of fractally all bound up with each other. There's certainly some kinds of pleasure that you can't experience without some pain mixed in. I mean, romantic love is another classic example of that. I mean, you have constant ups and downs in a romantic relationship, and you have some longing for someone, right? I mean, longing for your lover to come is a feeling of suffering in a way, but it's a pleasant kind of suffering. And then once they come and you're really happy, then the painful longing and the joyful reunion are all sort of mashed up together into one big pleasure plus pain feeling. Now, just because there are some kinds of pleasure that are wrapped up with pain, though, doesn't mean every kind of pleasure and every kind of joy has to be wrapped up with pain. I mean, that is our own human experience so far. Right now, when I prove a theorem, I enjoy that partly because the suffering and struggling I went through to figure out how the hell to prove that theorem is gone. It's like, yeah, I'm not struggling anymore with this. I finally understand it. I got it. And that feeling of, yeah, I got it, of course it's tied in with the days and days I spent feeling like an idiot and not getting the thing I was trying to prove, right? But does that mean that's the only way we can find joy? I don't think it does. This reminds me of people who say, you know, death gives meaning to life. Without death, we would have no meaning. Look at all the beautiful literature and music that were made to celebrate the fear of death or the joy of having a precious brief life before death comes. That's true. I mean, since we have death as part of our biological heritage, of course that's worked into our psychology, and of course we've struggled to find meaning based on that. Similarly, because we are human beings who experience pain and pleasure pretty much all the time in different parts of our body and mind, of course our experience of pleasure is all wrapped up with our experience of pain. Of course our joy is all wrapped up with our suffering. But that doesn't imply that death is the only way we can get meaning in life. We may find a much deeper, richer, and better kind of meaning without death, just based on the abundant possibility that comes when you're not afraid you're going to die, and you know you can learn and experience whatever the hell you want to. Similarly, you may find new kinds of joy become more and more appealing and more apparent once you no longer have pain to deal with. I mean, it may come to appear in the future that the intertwining of joy and pain, as we humans now experience, is a kind of perversion, just as deathist culture as we have now is a kind of perversion. It's a matter of humanity making do with the materials at hand, which we're pretty good at doing, and evolution is pretty good at doing. It seems to me that joy divorced from pain can be even more exciting and very complex. I mean, a constant universal orgasm at a constant rate of joy around the universe, just a massive transcendent joy field is one thing, but you don't need pain in order to have something more interesting than that. I mean, if you have a system that is growing and learning new patterns and emerging new complex structures all the time, as it grows, as it evolves and learns, I mean, it will be having bursts. Yeah, I've just discovered a whole bunch of stuff, and then you can have periods of lesser joy and periods of greater joy, and you can still have variety and complexity there, just as if you're going along a beautiful hike in the mountains and you see a very nice landscape which you're appreciating, you're enjoying hearing the birds singing, and then then finally you get to the peak of the mountain, right? I mean, there is the aspect that you've been struggling to climb up the mountain, and so then getting to the top, your joy is somewhat bound up with the suffering and struggle of climbing there. But there's also just the novelty of new patterns. There's the fact that you were looking at some pleasant but not amazing things, and then all of a sudden whole new vistas open up, something very exciting opens up in front of you. So you've gone from a decent pleasure to an outstanding pleasure, and that transition gives you a whole lot of surprise value, a whole lot of joy, a whole lot of growth, and the knowledge it was your choice to do that, to go there and transition from that moderate joy to that tremendous joy and beauty. It seems to me that just modulating between different amounts of pleasure may be enough to keep things from getting boring without needing suffering to spice up the mix. I mean, in a similar way, some people need to be tied up and flogged to experience sexual pleasure, and that probably gives, I haven't really tried it, that probably gives a unique experience. I mean, it seems popular. 50 Shades of Grey was a top movie recently, right? But I mean, most of us don't need that, and you still seem to have many different varieties of pleasure there, which are all pretty good without needing to mix that suffering up into it. So I mean, I think we shouldn't underestimate the degree of perversity that has been thrust upon human beings by the constraints within which we're operating. I mean, operating within a realm of scarcity causes us to seek joy through getting more than other people. Operating in a body that is going to die forces us to seek meaning in death. Operating in a body that's always kind of uncomfortable in different ways, and with a mind that's always, regretting or fearing or lacking something, causes us to seek joy in ways that mixes up joy with pain. But, I mean, that doesn't mean these are the only ways to find joy and meaning and prosperity and flourishing. I think there's going to be much more interesting ways. One bit of neuroscience that intrigued me a lot along these lines is the disorder called pain asymbolia, which is a quite rare neurological disorder in which people have a brain defect that causes them to know a pain signal is being registered in the body, but not to feel it as hurting. And we didn't even quite have language to describe this. I mean, the way I would describe it is they notice pain, but there's no ouchiness to it, like there's no hurting to it. Like if a knife was stabbed into my arm and I had pain asymbolia, I would notice, okay, pain signal registering on right arm. That's bad, right? Let's remove that knife, but it wouldn't hurt. And that's a bit strange. It's different than people with different disorders who just don't feel the pain, right? If you just don't feel the pain, you wouldn't even notice there was a knife sticking in your arm unless you saw it. And then you'd look at it and say, oh shit, there's a knife stuck in my arm. But I mean, with pain asymbolia, you would get that signal that there was a knife stuck in your arm, but it wouldn't hurt. It means that the registering of the pain signals the brain is one thing, and the hurting is another thing, a different part of the brain. So that's quite interesting. You wouldn't want to be a baby with pain asymbolia, not a stupid human baby, because then you just wouldn't get the appropriate reinforcement learning. You wouldn't learn that, like, squishing your finger in a tight place is bad, putting your tongue in the electrical socket is bad, right? We learn those things are bad because we try them when we're little kids, at least I did, and then you find out that's painful and you don't do it anymore, at least not that frequently. So, on the other hand, once you've grown up, I already know not to stick my tongue in the outlet anymore. I mean, I know not to squish my finger under a heavy weight. So for me, just getting the signal that something bad is happening would be enough. I don't need the ouchness of it. I can see, okay, there's a thorn sticking in my hand, that is bad for the integrity of my body based on my 48 years of accumulated wisdom, so I will remove that thorn from my hand. That's enough for me. So it seems that for adults who are not idiots, we could all have pain asymbolic. We would enjoy our lives much more. So if people figure out how to modify the brain so as to induce something pain asymbolic-like in an adult human brain, that would be quite cool and would improve our experience of life, I would imagine. Now, it would let some people do really stupid things, but yet some people do really stupid things now anyway, even without that, even though it causes them great suffering. It might also cause people to take more chances and do a lot more interesting things. Would certainly have a dramatic impact on many aspects of human society and psychology, which would be interesting to see. Now, this is an interesting phenomenon related to physical pain. It doesn't fully resolve the question of human suffering and joy, because someone with pain asymbolia, I would imagine, could still be heartbroken if their parents died, for example. It doesn't leave them emotionless zombies. And exactly how someone with this particular neurological disorder reacts to emotionally painful situations, I haven't actually seen any studies on. And there's only a few people with this disorder, and they tend to have some other things wrong with them as well. So this is sort of a cutting-edge area of neuroscience that we don't understand especially well, and that's hard to study in animals, because it has so much to do with subjective experience, which animals aren't that good at reporting to us. So I think there's still a lot of unknowns here, but the neuroscience that we're learning suggests that it may be possible to dramatically reduce the degree to which we hurt without eliminating our ability to function productively, safely, and with integrity in the world. How far you can reduce that, we don't yet know. Just as we don't yet know how far we can reduce the internal tension of, selfishness versus altruism and group dynamics without going beyond the whole human mind architecture. So there's a lot of areas where it's obvious we can do way, 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 way better for ourselves than what evolution has given us, and we can't really tell how much better until we try and develop our science a lot better and do a lot more experiments. But it's sure to be a very, very interesting next century, and I think we are going to find ways to massively upgrade the quality of human experience until we are pushing against the limit of what can be done while still being human beings with traditional human-like minds and bodies. And then we'll have choices to make. Some people will choose to remain human and embrace the remaining limitations because they want to remain human, aesthetically and emotionally, because that's their value system. Others will say, well, okay, humanity has these limitations. All right, you know what? I want to experience that extra bit of joy. I want to be able to learn and know more than the human body can, than the human brain can, and therefore I'm going to become something greater than human. I may want to become that gradually, little by little, so I can experience it and feel the transition happening. But I'm going to undertake this transformation knowing that what comes out of it eventually will maybe not even quite remember what it was like to be a human being. But this transhuman evolute that emerged through a series of transformations from my original human self is able to experience tremendous amounts of joy, tremendous amounts of learning and growth that it never would have been able to do in a legacy human form.
What's more important, reducing suffering or increasing pleasure? And which, if you choose one, then to what degree is it more important?
Well, whether reducing suffering or increasing pleasure is more important in a cosmic sense, I don't even know how to answer that question. It's more a question of what is your value system. For me personally, increasing pleasure is more important because I'm not a depressed person. So as a human being, I'm more interested in pursuing more new and exciting and amazing kinds of experiences than I am at alleviating unpleasantness in my life. On the other hand, if I had been born in Africa and were working in a coal mine all day, I might find that alleviating suffering was a much higher thing in my goal hierarchy, because, I don't need to develop new ways of experiencing pleasure. What I need is not to be breathing toxic coal fumes all day while swinging a pickaxe up and down underground. So I want to alleviate the suffering first. So I think right now, I was born to, American parents in a middle class setting, and I've been fortunate enough to have a life that doesn't have that much suffering in it. So for me, new forms of pleasure, new ways of enjoying more and more aspects of the universe feel like more of a priority, but I'm very sensitive to the fact that this is first world culture specific. For probably the majority of people in Africa now, getting rid of various kinds of suffering, which are imposed on them by the way the world economic system has evolved, is probably a higher priority. For the human race as a whole, I think we need to work on both. We do want to be working on enlarging the scope of experience and finding new ways to experience joy, new ways to grow, new choices that didn't exist before. But we also want to put a lot of our resources on alleviating the suffering of billions of people in the world who are leading lives that are, almost unimaginably worse than the lives of us in the middle class in the first world. I would also say the relation between minimizing suffering and maximizing joy is complex, and we don't fully understand it. There's a lot of suffering that we take for granted because it's just wired into the back of our minds. Suffering to do with, evaluating our status to not be as high as other people. Suffering to do with various things that we fear at a very deep level. Fear of death, fear of abandonment, fear of not being loved enough, whatever fears are encoded into our emotional minds, fear of being cut open by someone. All the fears that we carry around as part of our deep psychology, if we could get rid of the kind of ambient, low-level suffering induced in human psychology by all these little fears that are woven into our minds, would that automatically open us up to all kinds of new and amazing joys? It might well. It might be that the pattern of suffering encoded into human psychology closes us off from experiencing amazing joys that our mind and body would be able to experience. Certainly, this is what many spiritual traditions teach, that if you just let go of all the knots binding your mind and let go of all the knots making your body feel tense and uncomfortable, then you'll feel relaxed and whole. You won't have neuroses, you won't have fears and worries. Your body will feel comfortable with its breathing and its moving. And then you will just feel the joy of the universe coursing through you to a much higher level than ordinary human beings do. Now, the specifics of human spiritual traditions certainly are culture bound and are not going to be the ultimate way of looking at joy and growth and intelligence and body in the universe that we arrive at dozens of years from now, once we have enhanced our intelligence and understand things much better. But I do think there's a real point to that, which is that suffering and joy are not independent variables. Like, you can decrease suffering or jack up joy, and you can choose independently how much to wiggle these knobs. These are all part of the same self-organizing psychological complex, and getting rid of the suffering that has made our minds so twisted and perverted and our culture so twisted and perverted, getting rid of this suffering will immediately open us up to all sorts of abundant joy, both basic joy of existing in the world, as various spiritual traditions have discussed, and more complex forms of joy, more subtle forms of joy that humans don't know about yet, that we will only be able to encounter via upgrading our minds or hybridizing our minds with different sorts of engineered systems.